Last week I asked you, the community, to rate 34 different distros mostly focused on the desktop, from 1, the lowest score, to 5, the highest score. Now I have all the results. It's about 8.5 thousand answers across those 34 distros, and I'm gonna be able to basically rank them from the least well rated to the best rated, and from the least popular to the most popular. So let's get started after this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Kasm Workspaces. They are an open source project that lets you run various Linux desktops, Linux apps, but also other operating systems straight from your web browser. The Kasm project just released a technical preview of Helm charts for Kubernetes on their GitHub page, making it the first VDI platform for Kubernetes. The Kasm Kubernetes deployment supports a wide variety of hyperconverged infrastructures, including Harvester, Rancher, and Nutanix, with a new dynamic auto-scaling version on Proxmox coming next month. If you just want to run a Linux desktop or a Linux app or any kind of other operating system in the cloud and stream it to your web browser, just know that Kasm is the open source project for you. You can self-host it, or you can get access to their own software as a service solution. All the links are in the description below. So this was just a little form. It was open for 4 or 5 days, published on my own Nextcloud instance. I shared it on Mastodon, the Linux channel community page, and also I talked about it in the latest Linux news video. There was one question per distro with 6 choices. You could score from 1 to 5, and you could say you never tried it or didn't want to answer, or you could just leave the answer blank so you didn't have to answer at all. Each distro has its own question, and so when I talk about rating, it's an average of every score that has been given, ignoring the never tried, don't want to answer, and no response. And when I talk about popularity, it's the number of people who answered the form out of the 8.5 thousand answers that also gave a rating. So everyone who didn't say never tried or skipped the question. It's not a true measure of how popular the distro is, it just represents the number of people who might actually have tried that distribution. And of course, this is not representative of the entire Linux community. It's just 8.5 thousand people, which for the number of Linux desktop users in the world is ridiculously small. And also, it's just polling people that know of my channel, are part of my community, might mostly agree with my opinions. And so these answers cannot be generalized to the entire Linux community. If you want these polls that I will try and conduct every month on various topics to be more accurate, don't hesitate to check out the Mastodon page, the Linux channel community page, and just stay on the lookout for these polls and share them more widely so we can have more informed and divergent opinions. Now let's look at the ranking of all the distros that you voted on. The first one is Deepin. It gathered a rating of 1.97 out of 5, which places it at the 34th place. It is the worst ranked distro on this entire poll. And it is not because of lack of popularity, because it ranks 24th in terms of how many people actually tried it out, or at least reported that they tried it out by giving it a rating. That's 14.7% of people who answered who used Deepin, or at least who gave it a rating. I know some people will give a rating without having ever used something just because they don't like the name or something about this distro. As I said, not entirely representative. It kind of echoes my sentiment where Deepin as a desktop might be fine, but Deepin as a distro is just no. Now, second one that I included mostly for fun was ChromeOS Flex. It's not really a Linux distro, it's more of a proprietary interface on top of some Linux tools. It gathered a rating of 2.03 and ranked 33rd. It comes in at 16th in terms of popularity, or how many people used it, with 20.57% of people actually giving an answer. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people who ranked ChromeOS Flex did not try it. I highly doubt 20% of 8.5 thousand people actually installed ChromeOS Flex and tried it out. I think it's more of a hate vote, but it's deserved. ChromeOS Flex is just really, really bad. Coming in at the 32nd position is Manjaro with a 2.64 rating out of 5. And it actually comes 6th in terms of the number of people who rated it, meaning that 52% of people apparently have used it or tried it at some point in the past. Again, here I can't exclude some amount of hate votes on Manjaro because it's a distro I regularly criticize. The real Manjaro fans probably left the building a while ago, and the ones who remain are probably the ones who are in agreement with my opinion, which is that Manjaro is just arch but worse and technically even less stable. Now, coming in at the 31st place is elementaryOS with just 2.71 out of 5 as a rating. It ranks 11th in terms of popularity, meaning that about 28% of people who answered gave it a rating. I was expecting elementaryOS to rate a little bit higher on this chart. Personally, I would put it at 3, maybe 3.5, not at 2.7, but also I'm biased, it's the distro I started this channel with, and I know it just cannot fulfill the needs of a lot of people who just need a bit more options and a bit more flexibility. Now, at the 30th place comes Solus with 2.74 out of 5 for its score. It comes in at 29th in terms of popularity, less than 10% of people actually gave it a rating. Which confirms what I thought. Solus is interesting on paper, but it had way too long of a hiatus, and even before that, it just was not a very popular distribution. Not a lot of people tried it, and they really have not given a lot of people more reasons to try it out yet. Now, at the 29th place is Mageia. If you don't know about it, it's basically what Mandriva was, but it's been continued under a new umbrella. It has a rating of 2.81 out of 5, but it's actually the least popular distro on this poll. Only 4.1% of people who answered actually gave it a rating. I honestly never tried Mageia. I don't know what it does well, what it doesn't. It seems to be a pretty niche distro, but it also seems to be general desktop purpose, so maybe I'll give it a shot and maybe I can give it a little bit more popularity in the future, and you can know my own rating on this one, because right now I wouldn't know which note to give it. Next is Rhino Linux at the 28th place. It's got a rating of 2.83, and it's also one of the least popular distros on this thing. 33rd with 4.35% of people who answered actually giving it a rating. If you never heard about it, it's basically sort of an Ubuntu-based rolling release that uses a very heavily tweaked XFCE desktop called Unicorn that sort of replicates GNOME but with a few more options. It's a weird one, it has a lot of its own tools. I need to give it a proper look in the future. Right now I don't really know where I would put it exactly. Next is KDE Neon at the 27th place, only 2.85 out of 5 as a rating, and it comes in 10th in terms of popularity. 28% of people gave it a rating, meaning technically almost a third of people who answered the survey gave it a shot at some point. Not surprised to see KDE Neon below average. They had a lot of testing related problems, they have a lot of crashes, and while they do have Plasma, the next version of Plasma, first compared to all other distros, it's generally not very stable. The base is an LTS, it's sometimes difficult to compile the latest version of Plasma for it. It's just not a good desktop distro apart from testing KDE Plasma itself, but not as a daily driver. Next comes VanillaOS at the 26th place. It has a rating of 2.93 out of 5, so very close to 3, and it comes 25th in terms of how many people gave it a rating or how many people actually tried it at some point, with 12.6% of people giving it a rating. It's an interesting one. It is one of these immutable distros that really rely on distro box containers to actually give you all the packages you might want, a development environment. It's not a bad project, but it's definitely not meant for the general public. As user-friendly as they made their tools, it's just a concept that really doesn't give you many benefits when you just want a desktop operating system, not for dev work. and so I'm not surprised to see it under 3. If my community was more geared towards development, towards system administration, maybe it would get a higher rating, but in the desktop space, it's just not a really great proposition. Next comes ZorinOS at the 25th place with a rating of 2.94, so let's call it about 3. It is placed 9th at the popularity scale with 28.6% of people answering that yes, they did use it. It's actually kind of exactly the same score as KDE Neon in terms of how many people used it. Again, not surprised that it's really close to the average 3 out of 5 ranking. It's not a bad distro, it takes GNOME, it does something special with it. It can work for a lot of people who have older computers and don't really care about the latest, newest stuff. But for people who are excited about new versions of GNOME, new tools, new libraries, and want the latest features in the kernel, it just doesn't work, it's too old. For everyone else, it is totally serviceable, so it's average. Next, we have Peppermint. It comes in at the 24th place with a rating of 2.99. It's also 31st in terms of popularity, with only 8.7% of people who answered the survey actually giving it a rating. Now, Peppermint is mostly geared towards a lightweight distro with XFCE and older tools that not a lot of people will consider super valuable as their desktop experience. It's more meant for older computers that don't have a lot of oomph, and so I'm not surprised that not a lot of people tried it, but out of the people who tried it, they basically gave it the average rating, so I'm not surprised by that either. It's a serviceable distro, it just doesn't work for everyone, it's not a general purpose one. And then the only distro that got a pure 3 out of 5 rating is Slackware, coming in at 23rd place. It places 28th in terms of popularity, with 9.69% of people saying they used it. It's one of the oldest Linux distributions out there. It is not for everyone either. It is a complicated one to get set up and to run, but it's still there and it still has its public, so 3 out of 5 makes sense. Next, we've got OpenSUSE Leap at 22nd with a rating of 3.11. This one, a lot of people gave it a shot. It's 18th on the popularity scale, with 18.9% of people giving it a rating. That's probably where I would place it myself as well, at around 3 out of 5. It just doesn't suit my needs. It's too old, not updated often enough for a desktop for my needs, but it's fine, it works, it's reliable, it's got the OpenSUSE tools, not a bad one. Then you've got Puppy Linux at the 20th place with 3.13 out of 5, 20th on the popularity scale with 16% of people saying that they used it. Puppy is one of these distros also meant for really lower end computers. It's meant to use as little disk space as possible, as few resources as possible. It's kind of meant to revitalize older PCs. Makes sense that it's not been used by a lot of people, but that it gets a good grade, because for those computers, it's great. Linux Lite comes in with the exact same score as Puppy Linux with 3.13, so tied for the 20th place. Although it is far less popular than Puppy, it comes in at 30th place for the popularity scale with only 9% of people using it. Again, makes sense, it's a lightweight distro for older computers, not gonna be used by a lot of people, but for people who have those older computers, it's great, so it's an average, a little bit above average rating, it's good. MX Linux occupies the 29th spot with a rating of 3.14 out of 5. It's been used only by 16.43% of people who answered this survey. Again, totally understand, it's a fine distro. I personally would not use it. It is not updated often enough for my needs, but for what it does, it's good. But also, it's generally one of the most popular distros on DistroWatch, which really confirms that DistroWatch does not reflect the popularity of a distro, the actual use. Only 16% of people who answered my survey said that they even tried it, so either the fact that I never talked about MX Linux means no one else ever tried it, or it just means that MX Linux is overhyped on DistroWatch and really not that popular in the real world. And next, we've got Ubuntu at the 18th spot, 3.23 out of 5. It's number 1 in terms of popularity. 88% of people who answered the survey gave it a rating, meaning technically 88% of people should have used that distro at one point. It is perfectly square in the middle. I am not surprised that it's the most popular distro that has been used by the most people at some point or another, and I'm not surprised by its score. It's not the best, it's not the worst, it's fine, it's a little bit above average, and you can't really say anything too good about it. It works, and you can't really say anything too bad about it. It works. Next is Gentoo at the 17th place, coming with a rating of 3.26 out of 5. It's 22nd in terms of popularity, with 16.19% of people saying they ever used it. Again, a fine distro for the people who need what it offers, but also not a general purpose distro for everyone. I personally would have put it at a square 3, because for my needs, it's completely useless. What it offers actually hampers my use of a computer, but for some people, it's the only distro that offers this kind of option, so it's gonna be a 5 out of 5. Interestingly, Tuxedo OS comes in at the 16th place with 3.36 out of 5. It's 27th in terms of popularity, with about 10% of people saying they used it at some point. Now, maybe the fact that Tuxedo is a regular sponsor of my videos and that I mention Tuxedo OS regularly because it's the operating system I'm using currently to record and edit all of this stuff, maybe that skewed the results in its favor. I'm not sure. What I'm sure of is it's probably the best Ubuntu-based distro if you want a KDE desktop. It's updated more often than Ubuntu, it has newer drivers, a newer kernel, it's better than something like KDE Neon, so it works well, it's a very solid distro. Again, 3.3 is a good score for this kind of general desktop distro. Next is NixOS coming in at the 15th place. It's got a rating of 3.52 out of 5. And it's 14th in terms of popularity. 22.8% of people said that they used it at some point, or at least they gave it a rating. I was not expecting NixOS to beat a lot of the other distros on that list. It is a very good system, it offers a lot, but they did go into some form of hiatus for a multiple month. Well, there was trouble in the community. I wasn't expecting a lot of people to really jump on that bandwagon, but I guess it's good and people like it. 3.5 is a good score. Debian Stable and Debian Testing come in at the exact same rating, 3.63 out of 5, so tied for the 13th and 14th place. Although Debian Testing is far less popular than Debian Stable, 62% of people gave a rating to Stable and only 23% gave a rating to Debian Testing. So Stable comes in at the 4th position in terms of popularity and Testing at the 13th. Not a surprise, Debian is reliable whether you need the stable version or the testing one for a bit better hardware support. It fixed its major flaws, which was no proprietary firmware on the disk, meaning sometimes you just could not use Debian at all because you couldn't get the firmware onto your computer to actually make it work properly. You just did not have that opportunity because some crucial hardware would not work. This is now fixed, and now that you have Flatpaks, the older Debian stable base doesn't matter all that much, at least for applications, so it's just a good system. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is 12th with 3.67 out of 5. It's been used by 29% of people, coming in 8th at the popularity rankings. Again, a very solid distro, probably the most stable rolling distro I've ever used. It's just good, and it has the OpenSUSE tools, which looks like they were designed like 20 years ago, but they still work really, really well. It's a good system as well. Now, mostly for fun and because a lot of people requested it, I added Alpine to the form, and it comes in at the 11th spot with a rating of 3.71 out of 5. Only 18.9% of people gave it a rating, so it's 17th in terms of popularity. Alpine is generally not something you'll run on your desktop computer. It's meant for containers, it's meant maybe for a Raspberry Pi or some IoT stuff, but it was a funny one to include in there because a lot of people asked for it, and it comes in with a very high ranking for what it does, which is kind of fun. Nobara is next at the 10th place with a rating of 3.73 out of 5, 15th place in terms of popularity, with about 22% of people giving it a rating. Not a big surprise, it's Fedora, but with a lot of tooling for better gaming experiences. It's just fantastic. You can get it on any system, it works really well, you can kind of replicate SteamOS with it, it's really up to date, and it gives you a little bit better performance than some other distributions, although the difference is not that big. And now we've entered the top 10 proper. The 9th place is occupied by Fedora Silverblue with a rating of 3.77 out of 5. Only 19th on the popularity scale, with 17.8% of people saying they used it. This is a big surprise to me personally. I guess it was only rated by people who use and like immutable distros. People who never used it just did not give it a ranking, but it ranks pretty high. I used Silverblue way back, but it's been a while, so maybe it's a sign I should give it another go. Asahi Linux is 8th with 3.85 out of 5. Of course, it's 32nd out of 34 distros in terms of popularity, with 7% of people giving it a rating. Not a big surprise, it is a distribution that is only meant to work on Apple Silicon Macs, which a lot of people have, but maybe not a lot of Linux users, because with that and Fedora Asahi, it's your only choice really. Still, pretty good rating for people who depend on an Apple Silicon Mac. At the 7th place comes KDE OS with 3.87 out of 5 as a rating. It's only 26th in terms of popularity, with 10.7% of people saying they ever used it or giving it a rating. KDE OS is one distro that I never tried, but since it made the top 10, I definitely need to give it a shot. From what I could gather, it seems like an optimized version of Arch Linux with more options and a bit easier to get onto your system if you don't just want to rely on the command line. It apparently relies on specific file systems and specific kernel optimizations, so we're gonna give it a go at some point this year and see how much I like it. Next is another Arch-based distro. Coming in at the 6th place, it's EndeavourOS at 3.95 out of 5. It's 7th on the popularity scale, 30.9% of people gave it a rating. And I'm not surprised, EndeavourOS is basically just exactly Arch, but with a graphical installer. So if you want to use Arch, just use Endeavour and you'll get the graphical thing. I know I'm simplifying, there are other differences, but it's an interesting one. A lot of people have been clamoring for me to try that as well, so since it's in the top 10, maybe I'm gonna add it to the list of stuff I need to try out. And then we're at the above 4 out of 5 scores, the best scores on this rating list. Linux Mint comes in at the 5th place with a rating of 4.03 out of 5. It's 2nd on the popularity scale, right under Ubuntu. 73% of people gave it a rating. Not surprised, it's the most boring and reliable distro you can find, and boring in the good sense of the word, meaning it's not going to annoy you with constant changes or stuff you don't like. It's gonna keep doing its thing, it does it well. It won't fit everyone's needs, but it's generally never a bad option for anyone, and so it's really highly regarded. Now, more surprising, at the 3rd place, we've got Arch Linux tied with Bazzite with a score of 4.04 out of 5. Now, Arch Linux is far more popular than Bazzite, 5th on the popularity scale, 59% of people gave it a rating, compared to Bazzite coming in at 23rd place with 14.8% of people giving it a rating. And Arch Linux, I'm not surprised, it's one of the most well-regarded distros out there. I don't necessarily enjoy it myself. I like my systems to be more plug and play. I don't like reading release notes and wikis to know if I should apply an update to a specific package or not, and when I don't do that, Arch tends to break on my systems. But I know a lot of people just swear by Arch as the best Linux distro, that's not even close, so sure, I understand it. Bazzite, I'm more surprised. I guess it's a niche distro for gaming, and so for gaming it really does its job really well, and so it gets a really high rating, but as reflected by its popularity, it's not something a lot of people try. The second place is occupied by Fedora with a rating of 4.18 out of 5. It is third in terms of popularity, just after Ubuntu and Mint. It comes in at 64.6% of people giving it a rating. Not a surprise, I was honestly expecting it to be first or second after Arch Linux. It's just a good distro. It's solid, it's reliable, it's got a modern Linux stack, it implements the latest things without too many issues, bugs or crashes. It will leave some older computers behind, but it just works really well, and it now has all the options to install the codecs, at install to install the NVIDIA drivers, stuff like that. It's pre-configured, it's simple, it's just good. And at the first spot on this ratings, we've got SteamOS with barely more points than Fedora, 4.19 out of 5 compared to 4.18 for Fedora. It is only 12th in terms of popularity, with 27% of people giving it a rating. Again, I was not expecting a gaming distro to win this entire rank, tier list, however you want to call it. But it's a niche distro for gaming specifically, and for gaming it's probably the best because it comes on its own dedicated hardware that is meant to run it, so the experience is just fantastic and it just works well. Now for pure desktop distros, obviously SteamOS doesn't beat Fedora, Arch, Linux Mint and the other very popular ones, but in terms of rating, the community thinks SteamOS is the best. Okay, so this will conclude this entire rating. I left a link to all the results in my own Excel, open document spreadsheet right in the comments. You can download it if you want and try to grab your own data out of it or reuse it for something else if you want. It was a very interesting one. If you want to have other polls like this, leave a comment down in the description, give me a little thumbs up, and I know I will organize more. And stay on the lookout on Mastodon or on the community page, or just by listening to the videos that I make, and I'll give you the hints for when the next poll is live. Just like I'll give you a hint to buy a device from today's sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You all know about them by now. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. I only use their computers these days. All these videos are recorded, edited and published on one of their laptops. All my gaming needs are served by one of their desktops. I just use their stuff because it works. You keep the installed distro and it just runs perfectly fine. And as we've seen, Tuxedo OS is a very well rated distro by the community as well, although you can install anything else you would prefer. So if you need a new computer, you want to install Linux on it, and you want to support a company that actively contributes to Linux, I left a link to Tuxedo Computers' website in the description below. Now thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. You know what to do with all the usual YouTube buttons and comments. Tell me if you like this kind of video, and in the meantime, I guess you'll hear me in the next one. Bye!